Do not forget to subscribe to our Telegram channel for all the updates and materials. Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why, and how of newspaper analysis from the perspective of civil services examination. Today we have taken up Delhi edition of The Hindu newspaper dated 4th of April 2022. The articles which we are going to cover today have been displayed on the screen, and let us now begin the discussion. So the first news which we have taken appears on page number 10. Uniform Civil Code debate gains momentum. So days after the taking over as the Uttarakhand Chief Minister for a second time, Pushkar Singh Dhami, who was the Chief Minister, kept his pre-poll promise and announced an expert panel to examine the possibility of applying the Uniform Civil Code in the state. Even before the hijab row further fueled the debate, Rakesh Sinha, who is a BJP MP in Rajya Sabha, had moved a private member's bill for a law on Uniform Civil Code. A similar petition by BJP leader Ashwini Upadhyay is before the Delhi High Court as well. The government, though, has maintained an ambivalent position and is not taking clear-cut sides as of now. Now, Uniform Civil Code, or the formulation of one law to be made applicable to all religious community in matters such as marriage, divorce, inheritance, and adoption, is a burning issue for Indians and especially for politicians. Now, it is a proposal in India to formulate and implement personal laws of citizens which apply on all citizens equally regardless of their religion, sex, gender, and sexual orientation. Now currently, personal laws of various communities are governed by their religious scriptures. And it is an important issue regarding secularism in Indian politics and continues to remain disputed by India's political parties. Apart from being politically sensitive issue, there are certain things which are extremely important from the perspective of civil services examination. And at the base of the issue lies conflicts upon very essential properties and values of our constitution. For example, the call for Uniform Civil Code has to be seen in the perspective of Article 44, which is Directive Principle of State Policy, and Article 25, which happens to be fundamental rights. And since the beginning, it has been an extremely difficult task for our parliament to maintain the right kind of balance between TPSP and FR. Apart from that, how we trade on this matter will decide a right balance between national integrity and preservation of the diversity and the rights of the minorities. And so accordingly, this topic directly does not fit in any particular part of the syllabus. It could go well in GS paper 1 in Indian society part. It could as well be asked in GS paper 2, and it has been asked in 2015. Discuss the possible factors that inhibit India from enacting for its citizens a uniform civil code as provided for in Directive Principle of the State Policy. And so in this regard, what we are going to do is that first we will understand what Uniform Civil Code exactly stands for. Then what are the arguments which totally calls for and makes it a much desirable project for the Parliament. At the same time, we also have to understand the inherent issues or the problems it might be associated with. So from this perspective, we will begin the discussion, starting with understanding the Uniform Civil Code itself. So as you can understand, code means a law. Civil means a law dealing with civil matters. Civil matters means private laws related to property, family, obligations, which are basically not criminal in nature. And uniform means a civil code which is applicable to all the communities and all the people in our country. Now you would ask, is it not uniform for everyone? And so the answer is absolutely yes. Right now, the private matters of each individual related to marriage, divorce, adoption, inheritance is governed by their own personal laws or religious laws. And so as you can see on the screen, there are a lot of laws depending upon which particular community you belong to. And so, Uniform Civil Code is intended to replace this multiple and fragmented personal laws which currently govern interpersonal relationships and related matters within different religious communities with a single law which will be applicable to all the citizens of our country in their personal matters. Now this transition might seem very easy for Parliament to do, but this is one of the most hotly debated topic in India's Parliament and politics. Now whenever we look into a law, we have to look at its constitutional backing. And in case of Uniform Civil Code, the backing directly comes from Constitution of India under Article 44, which is a part of Directive Principle of State Policy, which lays down that the state shall endeavour to secure a uniform civil code for the citizens throughout the territory of India. So you can see, first and foremost, The most valid argument in favor of Uniform Civil Code lies in the Constitution of India, which makes it obligatory or duty in that sense on Parliament to enact Uniform Civil Code. And so one might ask, what is the problem? When Constitution mandates the state to do something, it has to do that. And so rest of the debate comes from there. It's not about enactment of Uniform Civil Code, but how you are going to enact the code and what provisions will it contain. Will it have any scope for adjusting for local and regional variations throughout our country, which just does not exist among various religions but within a community? Will the Uniform Civil Code finally take the look of majority religion? And so there are a lot of questions which still remain with respect to Uniform Civil Code. And so when we talk about legislation, the proponents of Uniform Civil Code state and give reference to many judicial pronouncements. For example, Shah Bano case, Sarla Mudgal case of higher judiciary, which have clearly called for Uniform Civil Code. And they have clearly stated that Parliament has the right and should make laws with respect to Uniform Civil Code. But at the same time, the opponents of Uniform Civil Code state that personal laws within double codes are mentioned in the concurrent list of Schedule 7, which means they list 3 of Schedule 7. And so, although the Parliament has the power to enact laws on concurrent list, but at the same time, we know that the entries in concurrent list are those matters which require regional modifications, and that is why simultaneously power has been given to both Parliament and legislature. The critics argue that if framers of Constitution had intended to have a uniform civil code across the country, they would have given exclusive jurisdiction to Parliament in respect of personal laws by including this subject in the union list. And so, this matter would be best served at the state legislature level. All the legislatures should come up with their own codes for civil matters, shall they think it fit. So this is the issue number 1 on which the debate is between the proponents and opponents. The second matter on which the debate is about how the application of Uniform Civil Code might collide with fundamental rights or might enable fundamental right at the same time. For example, a lot of proponents argue that it is essential for gender justice to have a Uniform Civil Code. They argue that most personal laws have been directly copy-pasted from religious textbooks. These religious or customary personal laws are inherently biased in favor of men and against women, and that's true. At the same time, they argue that religion and personal laws are different avenues. For example, in the landmark S.R. Bommai versus Union of India, the Apex Court had upheld that religion is the matter of individual faith and cannot be mixed with secular activities, and secular activities can be regulated by the state by enacting a law. But on the other hand, if you look at fundamental rights, we know that secular state should not interfere with the personal laws. A Uniform Civil Code is seen by many as a contradiction to fundamental rights guaranteed under Article 25, which is individual's fundamental right to religion, Article 26 Clause B, which is right to each religious denomination to manage its own affairs within courts in matters of religion, and Article 29, right to conserve distinctive culture. And so after the issue of legislative competence, fundamental rights, comes the issue of country's diversity. Because the proponents believe that promulgation of Uniform Civil Code is going to promote national integration and sense of oneness in the citizens of our country. Because they believe that different laws for different religious groups breed communalism. And instead of that, single secular law governing various aspects of personal matters would arouse a sense of oneness and national spirit. At the same time, opponents have equally compelling arguments. They say that instead of promoting national integration, the Uniform Civil Code is in fact against the diversity of our country, and to start with, we do not have national consensus on any such law. Because there has been skepticism whether there could ever be uniformity of personal laws in democratic and diverse country like India. Forget about multiple religions like Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs and Christianity and various other. Just take any particular religion, for example Hinduism. Hinduism itself offers a lot of diversity, which has to be accommodated within the personal laws. And so instead of hurrying for the Uniform Civil Code, what government should right now focus upon, or the Parliament first should create a national consensus as to what and to how much extent this uniformity is even feasible, and more than that, desirable. And then finally, the argument about simplification. The proponents argue that Uniform Civil Code is going to simplify laws that are segregated at present based on religious beliefs. Same civil law will then be applicable to all citizens irrespective of their faiths. But at the same time, opponents argue that Indian laws do follow a uniform civil code in most civil matters like Indian Contract Act, Code of Civil Procedure, Sale of Goods Act. Even these uniform laws, which deal with other civil matters of our citizens, have been amended multiple number of times and now they have become very diverse. And so even in the matters where uniformity exists, there's a space for diversity. And so this idea of simplifying the civil matters into one law or codifying the laws into single law does not hold true. Because recently several states refused to be governed by Uniform Motor Vehicles Act, which has nothing to do with religion or dealing into personal matters. So what is the way forward as far as Parliament and Government of India is concerned? And so there are three way forwards which we can clearly delineate. First, the government should focus upon evolution of consensus among various communities within a religion and among various religions within our country. For that, government can use effective information, education and communication campaigns about the significance of a uniform civil code and Article 44 that would go a long way in achieving milestone of national consensus. Then, the government could go about reforming each and every individual personal laws. So instead of replacing these multiple personal laws with single uniform civil code, is that it could amend each and individual personal laws, weeding out bad elements from each laws, bringing them all of them on almost the same table, if not exactly same. So as far as the consensus is not arrived, this seems to be the best strategy forward, which will preserve the diversity of personal laws while ensuring that they do not contradict the fundamental rights. In this matter, in 2018, the Law Commission of India in a consultation paper noted that a uniform civil code is neither necessary nor desirable at this stage in our country. However, Commission suggested certain measures in marriage and divorce that should be uniformly accepted in personal laws of all religions. And then the government could go about the strategy of model code, which the government has anyways done in a lot of matters. Government can come up with a model law, float it, and then leave it to the states whether to enact them or not. Now let's again have a look at the question which was asked in 2015 mains. Discuss the possible factors that inhibit India from enacting Uniform Civil Code. And now you can easily write 5 very solid points with concrete substantiation as to what are the factors which inhibit the Uniform Civil Code in India. At the same time, there could be other dimensions which can be asked in UPSC examination. For example, the need of Uniform Civil Code or what Uniform Civil Code is all about. And then finally, how to go about resolving this issue. And so all the dimensions have been covered in the discussion. Let's now move on to the next article. The next news which we have taken up appears on page number 7. Making groundwater visible. The existing approach of dealing with surface water and groundwater independently has severe limitations. Now in this small write-up, the author of the article talks about the major issues facing the underground water in our country. He talks about issues related to scarcity, pollution, extraction, and then suggests some measures. Now if you focus on the GS paper 1 syllabus, important geophysical phenomena as well as features, their location and changes in critical geographical feature including water bodies is a part of the syllabus. Groundwater being one of the most important reservoirs of fresh water on the surface of the earth and also below the surface of the earth will definitely get covered under this part of the topic. From the perspective of UPSC examination, it is very important for us to discuss the challenges with respect to the groundwater. The challenges with respect to the declining quantity and as well as with respect to the declining quality of the groundwater, which basically means the pollutants. So we will start the discussion by first understanding how groundwater actually works, what it is, where are the major reservoirs of the water, and what is the major use of the groundwater in India. Then we will move on and understand why these challenges are being faced in our country, and that is with respect to some very systematic issues, and we will see that how it is due to systemic issues in India's governance. And then finally, we will of course learn the way forward as to how to tackle this problem. So let us now begin the discussion. So if you have to define groundwater, it is basically water found underground in cracks and spaces in soil, sand and rocks beneath the surface of the earth. So as you can see, this is the top layer, which is the soil. Then this is a layer of a rock which is not permeable to water, and so that is why it is called aquitard. So any water seeping in from above, that is from the soil, will not percolate downwards. And beneath this layer, you have a layer of a rock which holds water, which is called an aquifer, which have a lot of pores which are connected with each other, and so the water is found in these pores, and this is the groundwater we are talking about. Below that, of course, we have another layer which does not permits the flow of water, and so that is why usually the groundwater is trapped between two layers which do not allow water to pass through. Now, most of the aspirants have a tendency to visualize groundwater as a flowing stream of river, which is partially incorrect. Why I say partially is because, of course, the groundwater is flowing beneath the surface of the earth, but it is flowing at a very slow speed, sometimes as low as 1 centimeter per year. Now here is the challenge. If you extract the water from this point to be utilized in industry or in agriculture, and if that extraction rate is much faster than what the water is coming from upstream, of course, what you are going to do is that you are going to deplete the water. You are going to create a region in this layer where there will be no water, simply because the water flowing in from behind is not the same rate as you are extracting the water, and so that is why the groundwater level depletes when you have a higher extraction rate as compared to the recharge rate. So that is with respect to the quantity. But what happens when you deplete the quality, and how it happens? So these are agricultural fields, and when you use a lot of pesticides and chemicals, and when it goes through the soil, of course it will be prevented in this case. But not all places have a non-permeable layer, and so you have a lot of instances, as you can see in the image, where the water along with all the chemicals can directly percolate into the groundwater, and which ultimately leads to the deterioration in the quality of the groundwater, which leaves it unfit for utilization by humans. Now, since we cannot see groundwater, and so that is why often the importance of the quality and the quantity of groundwater is underestimated. Out of all the water present on the surface of the earth, only 3% is fresh water, which means only 3% of the overall mass of the water on the earth, only 3% can be utilized by humans for carrying out various activities. And out of that, around 68.7%, around 69% is locked up in ice caps and glaciers. So of course that is beyond our reach. Whereas only 0.3% is the surface water. So the rivers, lakes and swamps constitute only 0.3%, and so you can see that around 1/3 of the total fresh water on the surface of the earth is groundwater. And so that is why it is very important for us to preserve one of the most important and also the largest after ice caps reservoirs of the water on the earth. And so, of course, the way we have been using groundwater since centuries have led to a lot of deterioration, especially in last 50 to 60 years. And we'll try to understand how and what are the reasons behind it. And so let us start by first understanding the decline in water level in the underground water. So of course, we have seen how over-exploitation and unscientific extraction, the extraction rate which is higher than what is being recharged, will obviously lead to the decline in the quantity of the water. But the way we have been doing agriculture in our country has led to inland salinity of the groundwater. So you must have experienced that a lot of times when you drink water, it tastes very saline. And the reason behind that is due to the practice of surface water irrigation without consideration of groundwater status. The gradual rise of groundwater level with time has resulted in waterlogging and heavy evaporation in semi-arid regions, arid or semi-arid regions, and that has led to a lot of salinity of the groundwater. And this is a particular problem in areas of Rajasthan, Haryana as well as in Punjab. Then you have the problem of coastal salinity inside the groundwater level. So we have seen that we have extracted fresh water a lot from the groundwater. So what this withdrawal of fresh groundwater does is that it allows the coastal aquifers to intrude into the groundwater or the freshwater aquifers in the coastal regions. So what it basically means is that the saline groundwater has slowly and steadily started to move inside the freshwater aquifers, and this is a typical problem in the areas of Tamil Nadu as well as in Gujarat. So we are facing the problem of decline in the groundwater, inland salinity, and also the increasing salinity of the coastal aquifers. But apart from this, you have a major problem of contamination of the groundwater with these chemicals, which are arsenic, nitrates, fluoride, iron, and uranium. And so let us look into what are the causes, what are the worst impacted areas due to these chemicals, and also what is the problem, why we should be concerned because of these contaminants. Starting with the pollutant which is creating the most news in last 5 years, that is arsenic pollution, and due to which many blocks and districts in West Bengal are being impacted. Its chronic exposure leads to black foot disease and also has been reported as a leading cause of lung as well as skin cancer. Now, how does arsenic ends up in groundwater? And to illustrate this, consider this as the top layer of the soil and the blue dots represent the aquifer. And so initially 100 years ago, what people did was they dug well, and that was very shallow because we did not extract much water till then. But gradually what has happened is that due to increasing removal of groundwater, the water level is going down and down and down, and because of which the wells which are now being dug are extremely deep. And in the areas of Bengal, there are rock formations at the deeper level which contain arsenic. And so as the wells are going deeper, the amount of arsenic they are taking in is increasing in number. Apart from that, there are various kinds of chemical pesticides which contain significant amounts of arsenic. Once released into the land, they leach into the groundwater. So that is about arsenic pollution in groundwater. Then we have nitrate pollution, and this problem is being faced across the country. Its chronic exposure leads to blue baby syndrome, and it is also known as something which I am not able to pronounce, but the bottom line is that the nitrate concentration across the country, unlike arsenic which is limited to a very small area, the nitrate pollution is found and increasingly being found across the country. Now, what is the cause of nitrate pollution in the groundwater? And that is due to the surface leaching, and you will see that whatever we use, for example, the nitrogen based fertilizer we use, ultimately whatever is extra not utilized by the plant washes down with the water. Then all the septic waste, municipal waste which is released into the open or into the rivers ultimately leaches down to the groundwater. And so that is why you will find nitrate pollution across the country. Then we have a problem of fluoride pollution, and this is a main problem in the state of Punjab, and its chronic exposure leads to neuromuscular disorders and teeth deformity, or also known as yellow teeth. Now, both human as well as natural causes are responsible behind increasing fluoride concentration. So natural causes would include rocks which have higher concentration of fluoride, the leaching of which is releasing fluoride into the groundwater. But here we are mainly going to focus on the human reason because it has increased in last 30 to 40 years. Now here, due to brick lanes and other polluting industries, whatever waste they are releasing into their surrounding is leaching into the groundwater, leading to higher concentration of fluorine in the groundwater. Then in areas of Assam and West Bengal, you have iron concentration which is increasing every year. And then finally you have problem of higher uranium concentration at various places in our country. Now here again you have to focus on a similar diagram as in the case of arsenic, where the water level is declining, and what it is doing is that it is exposing the natural rocks which contain uranium. Now as long as they are covered with water, they are in the reduced form, but as soon as the layer of water is removed from them, what they do is that these uranium atoms and molecules come in contact with oxygen, because now the pore spaces are empty and air can simply seep in, and this oxidation of uranium in the natural reservoirs is leading to their release in the groundwater, and its chronic exposure causes chronic kidney disease and whatnot. So these are the main challenges which is being faced in our country as far as groundwater is concerned. Now, if it is being faced, there must be some very important systemic issues with the way we are managing the groundwater. And starting with the very nature of the groundwater, the decentralized nature of the groundwater use. So basically and practically anyone can dig a well and start utilizing the groundwater. And if you invest some money, you can do it more efficiently with the help of pumps or submersibles. And so it makes it very hard to keep a check on over-exploitation and pollution of groundwater. And generally in India, the landowners enjoy the de facto right to extract groundwater under their land. But the problem is that the water which they are extracting is not limited to the parcel of land beneath their houses or homes. But if you extract higher, the groundwater from the surrounding areas would also be sucked in, and so higher the pump capacity, higher is the extraction capacity, and that is one of the biggest problem in our country. Then the problem is agriculture. The way we are doing agriculture ensures that 90% of the water for which the groundwater is being extracted is used in agriculture. And so if we are able to do something over here, if we are able to reform the ways through which we are doing agriculture, a lot will change as far as groundwater is concerned. Then there are three factors which relate to the governance of the groundwater. So we know that groundwater is primarily the responsibility of Central Groundwater Board and state groundwater agencies. However, there are only few observation stations in our country that cover all the essential parameters for water quality, and hence the data which is obtained are not decisive on the water quality status. Further, the monitoring ability is doubtful as these agencies lack adequate staff, because you need technical abilities in order to be able to do research on the samples, and also there is a limitation on the amount of fund or the resource which is being allocated to these bodies. And then we have a problem of conflict of interest. You need to understand that state pollution control boards in our country perform the function of monitoring the pollution as well as enforcing pollution control norms. Now this is a big conflict of interest. If you are failing to enforce a norm, and if you're not being able to do it properly, you're going to dilute your monitoring, because if you make a strict monitoring, ultimately you are going to be responsible for it. And so that is one of the important reasons why we are lacking so much on groundwater pollution. So as an aspirant, whenever we talk about problems, it is important for us to have a clear-cut idea about the solutions as well. So almost all of us agree that there is a need for us to enhance the agricultural efficiency, the efficiency in the way we are utilizing the water in our agriculture. And so that could be by designing new varieties of crops which take less and less water, or that could also deal with the groundwater recharge. So what that basically means is that you have to make sure that a lot of water which falls on the surface does not runs away in the ocean, and you have to make sure that a good chunk of that goes to the groundwater. And so there are various ways to do that. You can find them in the NCERT books as well. But there exists something which is known as a master plan for artificial recharge of groundwater, which was developed by Central Groundwater Board, CWGB. This was done in 2013, but it is not enforced in true spirit so far. It is a very comprehensive document, and so there is a need for the government to implement it in full spirit. Then a lot of powers have been given to the government, less under Water Act but more under the Environmental Protection Act 1986, which has given blanket power to the government to do anything for protecting environment, and environment can include anything and everything. And so the government can utilize these powers if it is serious about protecting the quality and quantity of the groundwater. Now there is a scheme known by the name of Atal Bhujal Yojana, which is a central sector scheme, and the fund for this particular scheme is coming from World Bank, but still it is not being extended throughout the country, but rather it is limited to just the 7 states. And so there is a need for this particular scheme to be extended throughout the country. And then finally, And then finally in 2016, the Union government launched National Project on Aquifer Management. The project proposes to cover around 1.4 million square kilometer under aquifer mapping between 2017 and 22, which is still in progress but needs to be completed so that we have a clear-cut understanding about our groundwater resources. So from the perspective of mains examination, this topic is very, very important. But also from the perspective of prelims examination, the mechanisms through which these pollutants reach the groundwater is also very, very important. Keep these facts and concepts in mind, and let us now move on to the next news. The next article which we have taken up appears on page number 6, Lift Spending. Official industrial data from February shows output in the 8 core sectors grew at the fastest pace in 4 months. However, when compared with January 2022, the output in all these sectors actually declined. At the same time, government spending, which could set the pace for overall growth in a stuttering economy, has not rolled forward. Capital expenditure grew at mere 0.8% in February from a year earlier. Now, whenever any article deals with government spending and its impact on economy, students are often confused. At even basic level, students are confused with respect to various concepts of government budgeting, for example, fiscal deficit, and what is its impact on overall economy. And so in this discussion, we are going to try to make you understand these basic concepts. They are extremely important from the perspective of prelims examination because these concepts can be directly tested along with FRBM Act 2003, which you will understand in a while. But apart from that, if you look at the GS paper 3 economy syllabus, Indian economy and issues related to planning, mobilization of resources, growth, development and employment is a part of your syllabus. Mobilization of resources also includes mobilization of financial resources, which means what is the relation between government's earnings and government's expenditure? And so it is extremely important from that perspective as well. So let us now begin the discussion. So let us understand the role of government spending and its impact on Indian economy. To understand the role of government spending and its impact on economy, we'll first have to understand from where does the government earn its money and how does the government spend its money. Now from the textbook NCERT information, you already know that there are 2 main sources for the government to earn its money. One is from tax revenues and another one is from non-tax revenues. When we talk about tax revenues, it is tax on income known as income tax, tax on corporate profits known as corporation tax, and various indirect taxes on the sales of commodities, goods and services. However, the second source of income for the government is non-tax revenues. And so the non-taxes revenues, as we understand, comes basically from profits of public sector undertakings, dividends that the government might receive, and interest receipts on the loans given by the government of India. Now with these 2 sources of income for the government, let us now understand where does the government invest or spends this money. And as again from the basic knowledge we understand that the expenditure of the government can be categorized into revenue and capital expenditure. Now, revenue expenditure is the one which the government has to incur for its regular functioning. So these mainly include payment of salaries, payment of interest on debt that the government of India has, and subsidies, schemes and policy, but is not limited to these. These are just a few examples. And then the other important avenue where the government money goes to is capital expenditure. And it is very different from the revenue expenditure because it leads to the formation of assets in the country. So when the government spends money to build hospitals, roadways, railways, airports, that counts as capital expenditure. So now that we have seen the inflow and outflow of the money, let us now quickly understand the deficit. What is it? Now generally, as in the case of households, if you are spending what you are earning, that's fine. Or if you are spending less than what you are earning, that's great. But we have seen that the expenditure of the government more often than not overshoots its revenues or its incomes. And so from where does government balances out the same? And that is through borrowing. The government can either borrow it from Reserve Bank of India or it can borrow it from the market. Now when the government spends more, when this side of the column is heavier than it earns, when the total expenditure that is on the right hand side is more than the total income of the government is known to be running a deficit, which is equal to total expenditure minus total income. Now, if fiscal deficit kept under check, it is not necessarily a bad thing. especially if the expenditure which is shooting the revenue is that of capital in nature, which is leading to creation of building, assets, canals, roads, and power lines. Then it is not a bad thing, because government is creating good infrastructure capital assets in long term, which will then help shoot up the economy. And these assets in the economy are going to give results in the long term, which are then going to increase the total income of the government. However, if the fiscal deficit is not kept in check, or if the fiscal deficit has a major component from revenue expenditure, from salaries, from subsidies, from interest payment, then it is a very bad thing. Because whatever extra the government is spending is on day-to-day routine functioning of the governance in our country, and that is not going to pay dividends in long term. And so let us understand what problems government or economy in general could face as a result of high fiscal deficit. And so the three problems which the economy faces as a result of high fiscal deficit is, first and foremost, high inflation, then secondly, higher interest rates, and third, higher taxes. And let us understand them one by one. Starting with the high inflation. When the government borrows money from the central bank, then the central bank, which is RBI in our case, has to print more money to lend it to the government. If the central bank prints the money and lends it to the government, which means excess of money supply in the economy, which is basically increase in money supply in the economy, and goods and services remaining constant. So your production is not increasing, it is at the constant level, but your money supply is increasing. So the same amount of money is being distributed in the equal amount of goods and services which was produced as the last year, which means each product is going to cost much more than the last year, which means high inflation. Apart from that, since the government is spending a lot of money, it certainly results in increase in aggregate demand in the economy. And if the supply of goods and services are not increasing in accordance with increase in aggregate demand, the increased amount of spending is going to be spent on the same amount of goods and services, and so it is going to result in inflation. So you can see that increase in inflation comes from both printing of more money by RBI and spending of more money by the government of India. Then let us now understand how does increase in fiscal deficit results in higher interest rates. How are these two things related? And here, the second aspect of borrowing comes into play. For example, for instance, if let's say government is not borrowing from RBI, but it is borrowing from the market, it's going to the market and lending money directly from there. So government of India is issuing bonds and floating them into the open market. So when the government of India floats government securities or bonds in the market, they are acting as a source of investment for a lot of investors. When investors see government issuing a bond, some of the investors might be genuinely interested in investing the government bonds. And so the government of India is basically competing against other sources of investment which might be present in the market. The fixed deposits, the post office deposits, or the deposits by the banks. And so all these multiple sources of investments have now found a new competitor, which is the government bonds. So for example, if I have 100 rupees to invest, and if I go to the market to take up various other alternatives, but now I see government coming up with its own bond, which is extremely lucrative. The other sources of income now have to compete with the government bond, and now they have to increase their interest rate, which they are now going to offer to their investors. Because otherwise, the investors are not going to invest in these alternatives. They are going to invest in government bonds, which are much more secure and offer a steady return, which then results in higher cost of capital for everyone. And so you can say that the source of capital for the growth of the economy steadily becomes dearer or expensive, which is harmful for the economy both in short as well as in long term. So that is where the high fiscal deficit causes higher interest rates. So we have seen higher inflationary pressure, higher interest rates, and let us now understand how fiscal deficit yields higher taxes on the residents of the country. And so that is very obvious, isn't it? In cases where the government is running very high fiscal deficit, which means very high expenditure, the government would want to increase its income. And the best way to increase its income would be to increase the taxation part of the income by increasing the tax rates. But as we all know from the basic NCERT textbook knowledge, that increase in taxes has ramifications across the economy. It can have impact on consumption levels across the country. It can impact investment decisions, which ultimately might result in extreme detrimental impact on overall economy. And so now you can understand that there are three very wide and valid reasons because of which high fiscal deficit is not such a good thing for sustainability of economy and government budgeting, because it results in higher inflation, higher interest rates, and higher taxes. especially if the fiscal deficit has higher revenue expenditure component. Although if it has more capital expenditure, then it should be less bothering for us. And that is why Parliament enacted FRBM Act, Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act, to institutionalize financial discipline, reduce India's fiscal deficit, and to improve macroeconomic management and the overall management of public funds, and moving towards balanced budget and strengthen the fiscal prudence in our country. So it's all about discipline as far as finances and expenditure of the government of India is concerned. So it had three main objectives: to introduce transparent fiscal management systems, to introduce a more equitable and manageable distribution of the country's debts over the years, and to aim for fiscal stability for India. Because if the debt and hence the fiscal deficit overshoots 3 to 5% and it is not coming from capital expenditure, it's not good for the economy in the long term. And that is why targets were given to the government by the Parliament to be met in due course of time. The government was asked to eliminate the revenue deficit of the country and to bring down the fiscal deficit to manageable 3% of the GDP by March 2008. But of course, we know in 2007, due to international financial crisis, the deadlines for the implementation of the targets had to be extended, and then this particular act has been amended umpteen times. But nonetheless, it is important from the perspective of prelims examination to know certain things. The act mandates the government to table three very important documents: medium-term fiscal policy statement, which lays down the limits on the size of the budget deficit for 3 years and target for tax and non-tax receipts. Then, the macroeconomic framework, which gives the government's outlook on growth prospects of the economy. And then the fiscal policy strategy statement, which explains how the current policies follow sound fiscal management principles and give reasoning for any deviation from the deficit targets set by it under the Act. So as we know, the FRBM Act mandates the central government to bring down its fiscal deficit to 3% of GDP. So in 2018, the deadline was extended to 2020-2021. But then COVID happened. Due to national lockdown, our fiscal deficit increased to 9.3% of the GDP in 2021. And to enable the fiscal deficit beyond the permissible limit, because this is a law and government has to abide by the law, the government amended the law itself in the finance bill of last year. And for the ongoing fiscal, the center is targeting a fiscal deficit of around 6.8% to be gradually brought down to 4.5% in the next 4 years. So from the perspective of prelims examination, it is important for you to understand what consequences a high fiscal deficit might have on the economy. And to manage this high fiscal deficit, Parliament has enacted a law which the government has to abide by. Let us now move on to the next discussion. The next article which we have taken up for discussion appears on text and context page, the Chandigarh question. So the recent decision by the central government regarding extending the applicability of central civil services rules to the employees of Chandigarh Union Territory has irked the government of Punjab a lot. It has irked the government of Punjab because it dilutes the claim of the government of Punjab over Chandigarh. Because Chandigarh, as you know, is a shared capital between Haryana and Punjab and is also a union territory. From the perspective of GS paper 1, it is important because post-independent consolidation and reorganization within the country is a part of your syllabus. And the reason because of which Chandigarh was created was because of the very fact that the United Punjab was partitioned into Punjab, Haryana, Union Territory of Himachal and UT of Chandigarh. And so in this context, we are going to look at some of the important information both from the perspective of prelims as well as mains examination. So Chandigarh, which is described as a planned city, which was a greenfield city, which means that that did not exist earlier and it is totally a new city, which was commissioned by the government in independent India to replace Lahore, which went to Pakistan after partition as the capital of Punjab. It was designed by world-renowned architect Le Corbusier. It is located in the foothills of Shivalik Himalayas on village land acquired from what was then the Kharar Tehsil of Ambala district. It was capital of undivided Punjab from 1953 until 1966. And as you can see, undivided Punjab consisted of these many present states and union territories. It consisted of Punjab, Haryana state, Himachal Pradesh state and UT of Chandigarh. But then Punjab had to be reorganized because of the Punjabi Suba movement and various states and UTs were carved out of the Punjab. So Hindi speaking areas were separated as a part of Haryana, hill districts were separated as a part of Himachal Pradesh, and Punjabi dominated areas were separated at the state of Punjab. Chandigarh was made a union territory and has remained the joint capital of Haryana and Punjab, with state assets divided between Punjab and Haryana in the ratio of 60 to 40. Now, since 1966, the lack of full rights to its capital has remained a vexed issue in Punjab politics. All the governments and most political parties of the Punjab have regularly raised demand of Chandigarh. It has featured in all major developments in Punjab politics, be it 1973 Anandpur Sahib Resolution, Dharm Yudh Morcha, or 1985 Rajiv Longowal Accord. It has been mentioned in all these resolutions. And so why is this issue of Chandigarh making news right now? Now, it has always made news, as we have understood. Punjab has always wanted to control Chandigarh in its full control. But now, the two decisions taken by the central government in 2022 have particularly made Punjab government anxious. For example, in February, the central government amended the rules governing the functioning of Bhakra Beas Management Board constituted under 1966 Act, changing the eligibility criteria for the two full-time members of the board, which have, though technically open to all Indian officials, by convention gone to officials from Punjab and Haryana. Officers from the two states may not be able to meet the new eligibility criteria given the technical qualifications specified. Then, as we have discussed, on 1st April 2022, Home Minister Amit Shah declared a notification bringing Chandigarh Union Territory Administration employees under Central Services Rules with effect from 1st of April 2022. And these two steps further dilutes the claim of Punjab government over the Union Territory of Chandigarh. And so the newly elected Punjab Legislative Assembly passed a resolution moved by Chief Minister himself in a special session seeking the transfer of Chandigarh to Punjab. With this, the Chandigarh question has again resurfaced. So from the perspective of prelims examination, you could be expected to know the provinces of United Punjab, when was it reorganized the last time, and what is the current position of Chandigarh with respect to the revenue sharing between the two states. Let us now move on to the next news. The next news which we have taken up appears on page number 10. World Health Organization has paused co-vaccine supply via UN bodies. Now, in this respect, it is important for us to discuss few things about WHO because it is an international body. It is not only a part of your syllabus under GS paper 2 under international relation, and a question has already been asked on the functioning of WHO, as you can see on the screen, and that was discussed in the DNS along absolutely the same lines 6 months before it was asked in mains examination. And so if you have to understand the overall critical analysis of the functioning of WHO, it is recommended that you go and watch this DNS, which is 2 years old. But today we are going to keep ourselves limited to the prelim-centric knowledge. So WHO is the specialized agency of United Nations responsible for international public health. Headquartered in Geneva, Switzerland, it provides technical assistance to countries, sets international health standards, and collects data on global health issues. A very important report published by WHO is known as World Health Report. Now, if we look at the performance of WHO, it is not that bad prior to COVID-19 pandemic. It has played an active part in eradication of smallpox and near eradication of polio. Near because there are 2-3 countries where polio is still found. Then WHO played a key role in development of Ebola vaccine, and it has led an active fight against HIV/AIDS, Ebola, COVID-19, malaria and tuberculosis. Apart from communicable diseases, recently WHO has also started focusing on non-communicable diseases such as heart disease, cancer, healthy diet, nutrition, food security, occupational health and substance abuse. So these non-communicable diseases could be formulated as individual options in the prelims examination, and you could be expected to identify the focus areas of WHO. So just remember that each and every aspect of health is dealt by WHO. When it comes to funding, it has contributions from member states, both assessed as well as voluntary, and private donors for funding. Majority comes from voluntary contributions from member states. Contributions are assessed by the formula that includes GDP per capita. And so When we talk about the largest contributors in terms of country, it is Germany, which contributes around 12.18% of the budget. And when we talk about private funding, around 11.65% funding comes from Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Let us now move on to the next news. Then the next news is new accessibility guidelines to use universal design approach, which talks about an upcoming notification by the central government regarding accessibility to the disabled people on public spaces. So if we talk about disabled people, as per Census 2011, there are around 2.6 crore persons with disability in our country. And hence, a need is felt for creation of a barrier-free environment and accessible ecosystems to help persons with disability by providing equality of opportunity and an enabling environment. And the provisions for this has been given in our constitution under Article 41 and 46. Article 41 talks about effective provision for securing the right to work, to education and to public assistance in cases of unemployment, old age, sickness and disablement, and in other cases of undeserved want. So Article 41 says that the government should make provisions for people who have become unfit for the time being or forever in the remaining of their lives because of various reasons. Whereas Article 46 lays down an obligation on the state to promote with special care the educational and economic interests of the weaker sections of the people and protect them from social injustice and all forms of exploitation. When we talk about statutory provision, the government has already created an act, Right of Person with Disability Act 2016, which has a provision, which has a section dedicated to accessibility in public places. For that, the government has come up with the Accessible India campaign, which talks about creation of accessible environment for people with disability, a nationwide flagship campaign for achieving universal accessibility that will enable persons with disability to gain access for equal opportunity and live independently and participate fully in all aspects of life in an inclusive society. The next news appears on Text and Context, NFC technology for instant payment. NFC or near field communication is the latest emerging technology which is now being deployed for payment systems. So it is a standard for very short range radio transmission. A pair of NFC transmitters can communicate at a maximum of just few centimeters. Both devices must contain NFC chips as transactions take place within a very short distance. So basically NFC builds upon radio frequency identification and contactless smart card technologies that enable stored data to be actively read at a short distance. And that is why it is extremely useful for payment systems. NFC technology addresses some of the security and privacy concerns of RFID by restricting the physical separation of NFC devices and tags to a close proximity. There are already smartphones on the market with NFC chips that enable purchase of items just by holding the phone closer to receiver at a cash register. One just has to type in quick pin to identify oneself and the purchase charges to one's electronic credit card. This obviates or removes the need for carrying physical credit cards. Then this last news which we have taken up appears on page number 8, the key takeaways of UNEP report on noise pollution. Now from the perspective of prelims examination, the only thing which you need to remember is that UNEP has come out with the report Frontiers Report 2022 headed as Noise, Blazes and Mismatches. It compiles studies about noise levels in several cities around the world and illustrates a subset of 61 cities and range of decibel levels that have been measured. Now, if you want to read more into the report, a very detailed submission has been given in the PDF, so you can read the PDF of today's DNS. Then this last news which we have taken up for today appears on page number 12. First case of infection from diabetes medication in India. So India has admitted incidents of a rare but serious infection of the genitals and area around the genitals among type 2 diabetes patients using sodium glucose cotransporter 2 or SGLT2 inhibitors. So basically, there are two types of diabetes, type 1 and type 2. Patients of type 2 diabetes frequently resort to a particular drug which are known as SGL2 inhibitors. And so all those who are using this particular drug have reported a very serious disease which has been now admitted into India as well. And this particular disease is referred to as Fournier's gangrene. And so in accordance, CDSCO, Central Drugs Standard Control Organization, has requested all the state drug regulators to direct the manufacturers of this inhibitor class drugs under their jurisdiction to include warning in the package and promotional literature of these drugs. Now it is your task to find out the difference between type 1 and type 2 diabetes and let us know in the comment section. Let's now move on to the question of the day.